My daughter pushed me at the Christmas table. "This seat belongs to my mother-in-law. Get out." I fell to the ground in front of the whole family, the sound of my hip hitting the polished hardwood floor a sickening thud that seemed to silence the festive carols playing softly in the background. But what she didn't know is that that very night, I would change her life forever. When she woke up the next morning, 47 missed calls. The scent of pine and roasting turkey had always been the smell of home, of love, of a life built with my dear Benjamin. For 50 years, that aroma had filled our house, a testament to the family we had nurtured within its walls. But that Christmas, the scent was tainted, thick with a bitterness that caught in the back of my throat. The fall itself was a blur of motion, a shocking, undignified tumble of aged limbs and crushed pride. What I remember with excruciating clarity was the moment just before, the look on my daughter Lisa's face. It was not the face of the little girl I had raised, the one whose scraped knees I had kissed and whose nightmares I had soothed. This face was a mask of cold impatience. Her eyes, the same shade of blue as Benjamin's, were hard as marbles. "Move, mother," she had hissed, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the cheerful din of family chatter. "Barbara is here. That's her seat." I had been arranging the name cards, a little tradition I'd held on to since the children were small. My own name, Dorothy, was placed at the head of the table, the matriarch's seat, the one Benjamin had always insisted was mine after he passed. It was a place of honor, he'd said, for the queen of his castle. But Lisa, my only child, saw it differently. She saw it as an obstacle. Her hand, firm and unyielding, shoved against my shoulder. Not a gentle nudge, not a guiding touch, but a push, a forceful, dismissive act of displacement. I stumbled backward, my worn slippers finding no purchase on the gleaming floor. The world tilted, a kaleidoscope of twinkling Christmas lights and startled faces, and then came the impact. A sharp, radiating pain shot up from my hip, but it was nothing compared to the deep, shattering agony in my chest. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, a crumpled heap of holiday plaid and graying hair. The silence that followed the thud was profound. It was a heavy, weighted silence, filled with the things no one was saying. I saw my son-in-law, David, shift uncomfortably in his chair, his gaze flicking from me to his wife and then quickly down to his plate. He did nothing. My grandchildren, young adults now, stared with wide, uncertain eyes, their fingers frozen around their smartphones. They did nothing. And Barbara, David's mother, the woman for whom my seat had been so violently claimed, simply pursed her lips. A flicker of something, triumph, satisfaction, crossed her features before she smoothed it into a mask of mild concern. She, too, did nothing. It was Lisa who finally broke the spell, her voice a saccharine performance of alarm. "Oh, Mother! Are you all right? You're so clumsy sometimes." She offered my hand, not to help me up, but as a gesture, a public display of daughterly duty that felt as hollow as a cracked Christmas ornament. I refused her hand. Using the sturdy leg of the dining room table, the very table Benjamin had built with his own 2 hands, I pulled myself up. Every joint ached, every muscle screamed in protest, but I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me completely broken. I stood, straightening my dress, my dignity a fragile cloak I wrapped tightly around myself. The pain in my hip was a dull, throbbing drumbeat, but the wound to my spirit was a piercing siren. I looked at the faces around my table, in my home, and for the first time, I saw them not as family, but as strangers. Strangers who had just watched me be assaulted by my own daughter and had chosen to be passive spectators. The love I had poured into them for decades felt like it was evaporating from my very pores, leaving me cold and empty. "I'm quite all right," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Barbara, Please take the seat. It seems to be of great importance." I did not stay for dinner. I retreated to my bedroom, the one I had shared with Benjamin for nearly half a century, and locked the door. The sounds of forced merriment, of clinking cutlery and strained laughter, drifted up from downstairs, each note a fresh stab of betrayal. How had it come to this? How had the daughter I adored, the child for whom I had sacrificed so much, become this cold, entitled woman who could physically push her own mother for the sake of her mother-in-law's comfort? The question echoed in the quiet of my room, a haunting refrain. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping in the familiar way it always had, and the loneliness was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Benjamin's portrait on the nightstand seemed to watch me with sad, knowing eyes. He had seen the subtle shifts, the growing sense of entitlement in Lisa, the way David's influence seemed to leach the warmth from her. Benjamin had warned me, in his gentle way. "Be careful, Dot," he'd say. "Don't let them mistake your kindness for weakness. Your heart is a treasure, not a public fund." I hadn't listened. I had believed that a mother's love was unconditional, a boundless well from which her child could always draw. I never imagined the well could be poisoned. The story of my life with Benjamin was one of partnership and hard work. We started with nothing but a shared dream, building a small construction company from the ground up. He was the brawn and the vision. I was the books, the planning, the steady hand that kept us afloat through lean years. We poured our sweat and our savings into that business and into the large, comfortable house we built on a quiet, tree-lined street. It was more than a house. It was a sanctuary, a symbol of everything we had achieved together. When Lisa was born, she became the center of our universe. We gave her everything we never had: piano lessons, summer camps, a car on her 16th birthday, a fully funded college education. We wanted her path to be smoother than ours had been. Perhaps that was our first mistake. We taught her how to receive, but not how to appreciate. When she brought David home, I had my reservations. He was charming, yes, with a quick smile and an easy laugh, but there was something insubstantial about him. He moved from one brilliant business idea to the next, each one requiring a small investment from us to get started, and each one fizzling out within a year. Lisa was blind to it, utterly besotted. "He's a dreamer, Mom," she would say, defending him fiercely. "You and Dad were dreamers, too." But our dreams were built on calloused hands and sleepless nights. David's seemed to be built on our bank account. Benjamin saw it clearly. He tried to set boundaries, to teach them about financial responsibility. After one particularly disastrous investment in an emu farm, Benjamin had sat them down and explained that our support would now come with conditions. Lisa had cried, accusing him of not believing in her husband. The rift that day was small, but it never truly healed. After Benjamin passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, the floodgates opened. I was adrift in a sea of grief, and Lisa and David appointed themselves my anchors. They moved into the house, ostensibly to take care of me. "You shouldn't be alone in this big place, Mom," Lisa had said, her voice dripping with concern. It sounded like love. It felt, for a time, like a comfort. But soon, their presence began to feel less like support and more like an occupation. David's mother, Barbara, became a frequent visitor, her visits growing longer and more intrusive. She would walk through my home, my sanctuary, offering unsolicited advice on redecorating, subtly criticizing my taste, my furniture, my memories. She treated the house as if it were already her son's, and me as a relic who simply hadn't been cleared out yet. The financial requests became more frequent, more demanding. It started small. "Mom, the car needs new tires. Could you help us out?" Then it escalated. We found the perfect private school for the kids, but the tuition is just so high. And then the big one. David has a real estate opportunity that's a sure thing, Mom. It's the chance of a lifetime. We just need to liquidate some of your stocks. Each time, I gave in. I was lonely, and their presence, however taxing, filled the crushing silence Benjamin's absence had left. I was afraid that if I said no, they would leave, and I would be truly alone. I was buying their company, their affection, their tolerance. I was paying a premium to be allowed to exist in my own home. I was a tenant in the life I had built. That Christmas night, locked in my room, the full weight of my foolishness crashed down on me. The push was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of 1,000 tiny cuts, 1,000 moments of disrespect and exploitation that I had allowed, that I had enabled. I had mistaken dependence for love and entitlement for family. The grief from my husband was suddenly eclipsed by a different kind of grief, a grief for myself, for the woman I had allowed myself to become, a doormat, a walking wallet, an inconvenience in her own home. The tears that came were not tears of self-pity, but of rage. A cold, hard anger began to solidify in my gut, dense and heavy as lead. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, a fire I thought had long been extinguished. Benjamin had always admired my inner strength, my quiet resilience. "You're the steel spine of this family, Dot," he used to say. Where had that woman gone? She was still there, buried under years of placating and accommodating, but she was there. And that night, she began to wake up. I didn't sleep a wink. Instead, I sat at the small writing desk in the corner, the one where I used to pay the bills and balance the company books. I pulled out a fresh ledger, just like the ones I used to keep for our business. With a steady hand, I began to write. I started with the down payment on their first apartment, a gift we had given them. I added the cost of the cars, the student loans I had paid off, the countless loans to David for his failed ventures. I meticulously went through old bank statements I had kept, my mind, once foggy with grief, now razor-sharp with purpose. I documented the private school tuitions, the lavish vacations I had funded, the designer clothes, the country club membership. The numbers climbed, page after page, a staggering testament to my generosity and their greed. By the time the first rays of dawn painted the sky in shades of gray and rose, I had a figure, a number so large it made me feel faint. It was a number that represented not just money, but my life's work, Benjamin's legacy. It was the price I had paid for a daughter's love, a price that had bought me nothing but a shove onto a cold, hard floor. As the sun rose higher, my phone, which I had silenced and left on the nightstand, began to vibrate. It buzzed once, then again, and again. I ignored it. I knew who it was. Lisa. The performance of Christmas Day would be over, and the reality of Boxing Day would be setting in. There would be a credit card bill to pay, a favor to ask, a need that only I could fill. The phone continued its relentless buzzing, a frantic, insistent plea for my attention. I let it go to voicemail every time. I showered and dressed, not in my usual soft cardigans and comfortable slacks, but in a tailored wool suit I hadn't worn in years, when I used to wear to important bank meetings with Benjamin. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the frail, grieving widow of yesterday. Her eyes were clear, her jaw was set, and there was a glint of steel in her gaze that I recognized with a jolt. It was me, the real me, Dorothy Johnson,
co-founder of Johnson & Son Construction, the woman who had faced down bankers and union bosses and had never once backed down from a fight she believed in. I finally picked up the phone. 47 missed calls, all from Lisa. There were a dozen voicemails, each one escalating in tone. The first was syrupy sweet. "Morning, Mom. Hope you're feeling better. I was so worried about your fall. Call me." The next few were laced with impatience. "Mom, are you getting my calls? I need to talk to you about something." Then came the frustration. "Seriously, Mom, this isn't funny. Pick up the phone. It's important." The final ones were tinged with panic and anger. "Mother, I swear, if you're doing this to punish me, it's incredibly childish. David needs the transfer for the property deposit by noon today. You promised." I promised. The words hung in the air. I had made no such promise. It was an assumption, an expectation, a demand disguised as a reminder. That was their method. They would discuss their desires in front of me as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion, and then later present it as a settled promise. The deposit, another one of David's sure things. My money, my risk, their potential reward. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. It was a dark, rusty sound. I deleted all the voicemails without listening to them in their entirety. I didn't need to. I already knew the script. Then I made a call of my own. Not to my daughter, but to my lawyer. My next call was to Eleanor Vance, my neighbor and friend of 30 years. Eleanor was a retired judge, a woman whose mind was as sharp as a shard of glass and whose tolerance for nonsense was famously non-existent. She had watched my family dynamic from her front porch for years, her discerning eyes missing nothing. I had often caught her looking at me with a mixture of pity and exasperation. When I told her I needed to talk, she was on my doorstep in 10 minutes, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a grimly determined look on her face. I let her in, and for the first time in 5 years, I was honest. I told her everything. The financial drain, the emotional manipulation, the creeping disrespect, and finally, the push. I showed her the ledger. She listened patiently, her expression growing harder with every word. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes or comforting lies. She simply nodded. "It's about damn time, Dorothy," she said, her voice firm. "I've been waiting for you to wake up. Now, let's talk strategy." Eleanor's presence was like a splash of cold, invigorating water. She validated every feeling of anger and betrayal I had, framing it not as a family squabble, but as a clear case of elder abuse and financial exploitation. "They're not just ungrateful, Dorothy, they're parasitic," she stated, her legal mind dissecting the situation with brutal efficiency. "They have attached themselves to you and are draining you dry. We need to perform a surgical removal." Her words were harsh, but they were exactly what I needed to hear. They cut through the fog of guilt and misplaced maternal obligation. With Eleanor's help, I spent the day making a plan. It was meticulous, it was calculated, and it, I had to admit, was beautifully vindictive. My first concrete action was a simple one. While Lisa and David were out, presumably trying to salvage David's latest deal without my funds, I had a locksmith come and change every lock in the house, the front door, the back door, the garage, even the small gate to the garden.
The click of the new bolt sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my sanctuary being reclaimed. Their return that evening was a spectacle. I watched from the upstairs window, hidden behind the lace curtains of my bedroom. Their car pulled into the driveway, and they walked to the front door, laughing about something. Lisa's key went into the lock, and then it didn't turn.
The confusion on her face was comical. She tried again, jiggling it with increasing force. David pushed her aside, trying his own key with the same result. The laughter died. The confusion morphed into annoyance, then anger. Lisa began pounding on the door, her voice shrill. "Mom! Mom, open the door! What's wrong with the lock?" I did not answer. Instead, I let them pound and shout for a full 5 minutes before I opened the window just a crack. "Is there a problem, Lisa?" I asked, my voice calm and even. Her head snapped up, her face a mask of fury. "What did you do? Why can't we get in?" she shrieked. "I had the locks changed," I replied simply. "There was a security concern." David stepped forward, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of authority. "Dorothy, this is ridiculous. This is our home. Let us in right now." "Actually, David," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the cold evening air, "this is my home. My name and my late husband's name are the only ones on the deed. You are guests here, and your visiting privileges have been temporarily suspended." The shock on their faces was a masterpiece. They stood there, speechless, their mouths opening and closing like fish. "My belongings are in there, my children's things," Lisa finally stammered. "Of course," I said smoothly, "and I will have them packed and delivered to an address of your choosing, just as soon as you provide one. For tonight, I suggest a hotel. You can put it on your own credit card." I closed the window, shutting out her enraged screams. That night, for the first time in 5 years, my house was quiet. The silence was not empty or lonely. It was peaceful. It was mine. The next few days were a war of attrition waged over the phone. They tried every tactic in their playbook. Lisa began with tears and apologies. "I'm so sorry, Mommy. I don't know what came over me at Christmas. I was just so stressed. Please, let us come home." When that didn't work, she turned to guilt. "The children are miserable in this tiny hotel room. They miss their grandmother. How can you do this to your own grandchildren?" Then came the threats delivered by David. He blustered about tenants' rights, about lawyers, about having me declared mentally incompetent. "You're an old woman, Dorothy. You're not thinking clearly. A judge will see that we're just trying to take care of you." Thanks to Eleanor's counsel and the lawyer she had recommended, I was prepared for every salvo. To the tears, I said, "I accept your apology, Lisa, but my decision stands." To the guilt, I replied, "The children are welcome to visit me once you have found your own place to live. I will even take them for the weekend to give you time to apartment hunt." And to David's threats, my lawyer sent him a cease and desist letter along with a formal eviction notice giving them 30 days to remove their remaining possessions, which I had already had professionally packed and moved into a storage unit. The letter also included a restraining order preventing them from coming within 500 feet of my property. Each countermove was met with sputtering rage on their end and a growing sense of calm empowerment on mine. I was dismantling their power over me piece by piece, and they had no idea how to fight back against a woman who was no longer afraid of being alone. During this time, I delved deeper into the paperwork Benjamin had left behind. In a locked file cabinet in his old office, a room they had never bothered to enter, I found something extraordinary. It wasn't just old bank statements. It was a file he had labeled the Lisa and David Fund. Inside was a meticulously detailed record of every significant sum of money we had ever given them, with dates, amounts, and the stated purpose for the funds. Alongside each entry, Benjamin had written a small note. Loan for David's import-export business, never repaid. Gift for European vacation. They didn't send a single postcard. Covered their credit card debt. Again. But the most important document was at the very back. It was a formal loan agreement for the money we had given them for the down payment on their first house, the one they had sold to fund David's sure thing real estate venture that I had just refused to bankroll. They had signed it, Both of them. The document stipulated that if they ever sold that property, the loan was to be repaid to us in full, with interest. They had sold it 2 years ago, and of course, had never mentioned a word about repaying us. My lawyer's eyes lit up when I showed it to her. It was ironclad. The final piece of my plan was the most difficult, but also the most necessary. I had to confront the image I had of myself as a mother. I had to accept that the daughter I had raised, or at least the daughter I thought I had raised, no longer existed. This new Lisa, the cold, calculating woman who saw me as an obstacle and a resource, was a stranger. To heal, I had to sever the tie, not just physically, but emotionally. I decided to sell the house. The decision was a pang in my heart. This was the house where I had raised my child, where I had loved my husband, the repository of a lifetime of memories. But it was also the scene of my greatest humiliation, the gilded cage where I had allowed myself to be held captive. To be truly free, I had to leave it behind. My lawyer found a buyer quickly, a young family with bright-eyed children who looked at the big backyard with wonder. They reminded me of Lisa when she was little. The closing was scheduled for the end of the month. I had found a beautiful modern condominium in a vibrant retirement community, one with a pool and a social club and neighbors who were active and engaged. A new life was waiting for me. But before I could embrace it, there was one last thing I had to do. I needed closure. I needed to look my daughter in the eye and have her understand the consequences of her actions. I arranged a final meeting. I called Lisa and told her I wanted to discuss a financial settlement to help them get back on their feet. I proposed we meet at my lawyer's office, presenting it as a neutral ground. The bait of money was too tempting for them to resist. They agreed immediately, their voices suddenly warm and conciliatory. They arrived at the lawyer's office looking smug, David in a suit that was slightly too tight, Lisa with a carefully practiced expression of remorseful concern. They believed they had won. They thought the old, soft-hearted Dorothy was back, ready to open her checkbook to smooth things over. They walked into the conference room and stopped short. It wasn't just me and my lawyer, Miss Davies, waiting for them. Eleanor was there, and so was my brother Robert and his wife, whom I had flown in from out of state. I had also invited our longtime pastor. The trap was set. Lisa's smile faltered. "What is all this?" she asked, her eyes darting around the room. David's bravado seemed to shrink under the weight of so many solemn gazes. "Please, sit down," Ms. Davies said, her voice professionally neutral as she gestured to the 2 empty chairs opposite us. They sat, looking wary and cornered. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, savoring their discomfort. Then I began to speak. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply laid out the facts, my voice as cold and hard as the anger that had been simmering inside me for weeks. I called this meeting because there are some things that need to be said, and some matters that need to be settled, I began, my eyes locked on Lisa.
For years, I have supported you, financially and emotionally. I did so out of love. I see now that my love was not reciprocated, but rather, it was exploited. I slid a copy of the ledger I had compiled across the polished table. It landed in front of them with a soft thud. This is a partial accounting of the money I have given you since your father passed away. The total, as you can see, is quite substantial. David scoffed, trying to regain his footing. Those were gifts, Dorothy. A mother helping her child. Were they? I countered, my voice dangerously quiet. Was it a gift when you forged my signature on a credit card application?
My lawyer found that last week. I let that sink in. The color drained from Lisa's face. Or was it a gift when you had my jewelry appraised without my knowledge? The insurance company was kind enough to forward me a copy of the revised policy you tried to take out. I slid another document across the table. It was the signed loan agreement from Benjamin's file. And this, I believe, was most certainly not a gift. This is a legally binding loan document for $200,000, which you defaulted on 2 years ago. With interest, you currently owe my husband's estate just over $253,000. The room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. My brother Robert, a man who had always been intimidated by David's bluster, was looking at my son-in-law with pure contempt. Our pastor looked deeply troubled. Barbara, who had insisted on coming with them, perhaps for moral support or to ensure she got her cut, was looking pale. "This is insane," David stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. "You can't prove any of this." "Oh, I can," I said calmly, "but I'm not going to. I am not suing you. I am not pressing charges for the fraud, though I have every right to." A flicker of relief crossed their faces, and it was precisely the reaction I had anticipated. I am doing something much simpler. I am cutting you off, completely. I looked directly at Lisa, the daughter who had pushed me. The house has been sold. The closing is next Friday. The proceeds, after my new home is paid for, are being placed in an irrevocable trust. The beneficiaries of that trust will be your children, but they will not have access to a single penny until they are 35 years old. The trust will be managed by my brother. The dam of Lisa's composure finally broke. "You sold my house?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "That was supposed to be my house." "It was never your house, Lisa," I said, the finality of my words hanging in the air. "It was my home, a home you were a guest in. A home where you pushed your elderly mother to the floor because her presence was an inconvenience to you. You did not value the home, you only valued its monetary worth. You did not value me, you only valued what I could provide for you." I stood up, my body feeling lighter than it had in years. "The debt of $253,000 is hereby forgiven. Consider it my final gift to you. It is your severance package from this family. Do not contact me again. Do not try to visit me. My lawyer will inform you of the legal consequences if you violate the restraining order which I am having extended. We are done." I turned and walked out of the conference room without a backward glance. I did not need to see their reactions. I could feel their world imploding behind me. Eleanor and Robert followed me out, their silent support a comforting presence at my back. As we walked down the hallway, I could hear the muffled sounds of Lisa's hysterical sobbing and David's enraged shouting. It was the sound of consequences. It was the sound of my freedom. My new life began the following week. The condominium was bright and airy, filled with sunlight and new furniture that I had picked out myself for myself. There were no ghosts of the past, no lingering shadows of disrespect. I joined a water aerobics class and a gardening group. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected, and I made new ones. I traveled, taking a cruise to Alaska that Benjamin and I had always talked about but never taken. I sent my grandchildren postcards from every port, and I called them once a week. I made it clear that my relationship with them was separate from my relationship with their parents, and that my love for them was unconditional, but my home and my bank account were not.
They were old enough to understand, and to my surprise and relief, they began to visit me on their own. I heard about Lisa and David through the grapevine. Without my financial support, their lavish lifestyle collapsed. They had to move into a small, cramped rental apartment in a less desirable part of town. David's sure-thing real estate deal had predictably fallen through without my investment, and he was forced to take a menial sales job. Lisa had to go back to work for the first time in 15 years.
Barbara, no longer able to enjoy the comforts of my home, apparently stopped visiting them altogether. They were facing the harsh reality of living within their own means, a lesson they should have learned decades ago. I felt no joy in their struggle, but I felt no pity either. I felt a quiet, detached sense of justice. They had made their bed, and now they were finally being forced to lie in it. One evening, sitting on my new balcony and watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, I thought about that awful Christmas day. The memory of the fall, the sharp pain in my hip, the cold floor against my cheek, it was still there, but it no longer had the power to wound me. It was no longer a symbol of my humiliation, but a reminder of my awakening. It was the moment I stopped being a victim and started being a survivor. The push was the most painful and ultimately the most liberating gift my daughter ever gave me. It pushed me out of a life of quiet desperation and into a future of my own making, a future of peace, dignity, and self-respect. I had lost a daughter, but I had found myself. And it was a trade I would make again in a heartbeat. I often wonder what you would have done in my place. Would you have forgiven her? Would you have continued to endure for the sake of family, for the sake of keeping the peace? Let me know in the comments below what your honest reaction would be. I read every single one, and it helps to know that none of us are truly alone in these struggles. Write me where you heard this story. It's fascinating to see how far these tales of life can travel. If this story touched your heart, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Your support allows me to continue sharing these important experiences. There are many other stories waiting for you, tales of resilience, justice, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. For those who are able to, using the Super Thanks feature is a wonderful way to help support the creation of more content like this. Thank you for listening. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.